Hello and welcome to Daddy WarBux Reviews. This is the only podcast where one guy watches a movie and then rambles about it for an unknown amount of time. I'm your host, Daddy WarBux. We're putting this out because we've been a little bit behind on content. We know that a couple of our episodes were unfortunately removed from YouTube on top of that, so we just want to give some extra content to all the fans out there. I recently saw Alien Romulus, and I got a lot to say about it. I will give a warning when we're going to get into spoilers territory, so if that is a concern of yours, no worries. First, we're going to be talking just a little bit about this movie and my opinions on it. And the first thing I want to say is this is the Alien movie that Alien fans have been waiting decades for. This is, I'm going to say 10 out of 10. This was start to finish, unbelievable. I don't know if I want to call it a perfect movie, but it is so damn good. It never lets up. Every aspect of the film is fantastic. And first, I want to talk about just the sort of the look and style of this movie because, for one, it does go back to the original Alien formula in the sense that this movie does take place aboard a spaceship, and it thus is characterized by closed, cramped, claustrophobic, confined areas. It's dark. It's especially grimy. And it feels like what science fiction movies from the 80s felt like. And the word or phrase that sort of came to my mind as I was watching this is analog punk. And by that I mean all of the screens have that CRT look to them. They all have like that VHS sort of graininess to them that sort of characterizes 80s sci-fi, in my opinion. It also feels very dirty and grimy, where everything just feels like an industrial shop that's caked under decades and decades of grime and grease. And for me, that just feels more realistic than the ultra-modern, sterile look of spaceship movies and science fiction that probably has been around since I don't know when sci-fi sort of changed like that, but at least throughout the 2000s, most science fiction, everything is just sterile, crisp, clean, white, or stainless steel, seamless. And for me, just having that sort of industrial look where everything feels used just makes the environment feel more believable to me. And the only other example I can think of off the top of my head is another great movie called Prospect, in which the spaceship, everything just looks like it's running off of secondhand parts. Everything looks like it's been used and abused. And then, comedically enough, that movie is also about space miners. The Wayland Corporation, as we know, does a lot of space mining and has mining colonies and all that great stuff. So it feels so gritty and dystopian in a way that like cyberpunk feels, but without like the cybernetic stuff. More, again, I think analog punk sort of sums it up perfectly. We have a great cast of characters, and all of them feel real. All of them to go back to Prometheus, none of these characters do stupid things that make no sense, and the things they do are all fueled by motivations and what their characters are. They act, one, like real people, and two, they act in a way that is consistent with who each of them are as individuals, which, from a writing standpoint, I loved. We have Rain, who is obviously our Ripley-inspired character. She is what one might call a strong female lead, and she is absolutely perfect. And we don't talk a lot too much about culture war stuff or like movies being woke or not woke or things like that, because frankly that is too politicized, and that's not what we're about here at Oily Trash Movies. We're only into these movies for the artistic value of them. But as far as Rain goes, she was an incredibly believable female lead, and she acted heroically, and she, I think a lot of the criticism sometimes is that you have a woman who, goes and fights 10 guys twice her size, which obviously is unrealistic, or it becomes like an action hero somehow. And we don't get that. We do have some action, but there's a pretty clever plot device for, you know, why she's able to do some things that might otherwise seem a bit contrived, I would say. And, she is a woman who, she's orphaned. She is essentially abused by the greedy Wayland Corporation, and is essentially an indentured servant. And she just wants a better life and wants to escape her mining colony where she has not seen the sun for many years, and she embarks on a quest with her friends, and thus begins the movie. All of the action feels genuinely suspenseful for the most part. There is one scene that I had a little bit of a complaint with, which I'll get into later, but as far as an exciting action movie goes, you're on the edge of your seat, and people are being chased by aliens, music's blaring, you're genuinely pumped, it's genuinely exciting. There are, as far as the horror goes, another scene I want to talk about later when we get into spoiler territory, there is great horror as well. I think this movie manages to sort of walk the line between the straight horror of the first Alien and the more action adventure of Aliens in a way that satisfies fans of both of those movies. And as far as the rest of these movies go, what I especially loved in this movie was some of the beats. I don't want to say they were homages, but there are definitely some scenes that feel not quite like they're fan service, but they feel they're reminiscent enough of many of the previous Aliens movies in a way that doesn't feel like overt fan service and feels more like, oh, these are just kind of the motifs of the Aliens franchise. It's difficult to articulate, but man, fans of the series will no doubt recognize some things here and there that just make you remember some of the coolest scenes of those, of all of the original movies, including some of the later ones, which, I'm personally not a fan of the Prometheus film and Covenant, but I'm a huge fan of Alien 1 and 2, and I've always said, you know what, I'm probably going to get a lot of hate for this. I think Alien Resurrection was always the best of the Aliens movies until Romulus. Romulus is my new favorite. And another thing that I love about this movie is something that has always been a theme both in the Alien franchise and in H.R. Geiger's artwork, and that is sexuality. The original Alien, with its mouth and its penetration and the face hugger and the impregnation of people with its alien eggs, is, and this is according to director Ridley Scott, supposed to invoke imagery of rape. And that's definitely on display here in this movie. It's not like it's been cranked to 11 or anything, but if you've just seen the trailer, there's the scene where the one thing's trying to poke its junk into the guy's mouth, and he's pulling it away, and it's fighting with them. There's a few facehugger scenes that do feel more like you feel the violation more in the facehugger attack sequences, definitely more so than in previous films. But as far as sexual imagery goes, there's a scene where you've got the alien and it's sort of like chrysalis pod or whatever that word is, where it's like in its sort of like incubation chamber, and there's an orifice in the front of it that is dripping, and it just, it looks so much like just a dripping wet vagina that it's almost pornographically obscene. It feels like just straight up gynecological, and that point is even driven home more when the alien starts to come out, and it really looks like birth. We've got the sexual imagery, and now we've got the birth imagery where the alien's head is essentially crowning in this through this chrysalis pod that it's in, and it's super. It just gives you that feeling of Alien, like, oh, it makes your skin crawl. We are introduced to a mechanic early on in the movie where, and if you've seen the trailer, you know that there are sequences in which there is zero gravity. And even though it might not actually make sense, or it might be kind of magical, as far as like how gravity works from a physics perspective, it might not necessarily be 100% accurate, but it's introduced very clearly how the mechanic works in this movie right in the beginning. And even though it's a little bit fanciful, it's so well defined and established how it works, why it works, and the mechanisms by which this gravity system engages and disengages. It makes for a great movie mechanic because we know how it works, and then the script can just sort of go off with it. And you build your action set pieces around that. You build some of your suspense and tension around that. And the audience is never confused. It never feels like arbitrary, where like, oh, we're just going to have gravity turn on and off for this reason or that. You understand perfectly, which it makes it a great mechanic because it's not just some Deus Ex plot device. It's an actual mechanism in which the plot can then be built around. It makes the movie feel so whole and so well written in that regard. All right, so next I want to talk about some of the plot points, which I'll consider mildly spoilerish. Actually, no, this is where we do get into spoilers, although I'm not going to get into the specific scenes I want to talk about yet. So if you don't want anything spoiled, definitely tune out now. But if you don't mind hearing a little bit about some of the stuff that happens in the plot that I think really makes this a fantastic film, feel free to listen until the next warning. One, I'm going to say this movie had a perfectly structured ticking clock element where it's established right away, like, oh, we've got a certain amount of time, and we've got to achieve our mission in that amount of time, or we all die. Classic ticking clock. And like all great ticking clocks, it's something happens where the countdown is, accelerated, and it becomes even more of a threat to the characters and everyone on board the space station. It works perfectly for me. It keeps that underlying tension going at all times, and then in the second half of the movie, when things are going even faster, boy, it never lets up. There's always something. While the characters are in immediate danger, there's always some underlying danger that is constantly ticking towards zero, constantly keeping the audience engaged, constantly keeping the audience excited. And then next I want to talk about what I think who stole the show, the character Andy. Andy is a synthetic. I thought it was a clever name, Andy the android, although they never say he's an android. They never call him an android at any point. He's just Andy. And he is, I think, the perfect dynamic character. And as much as I love Michael Fassbender as an actor, his character that he had to play in Prometheus was sort of a mess. So we have Andy, and he is introduced. He's so sympathetic. He is this old, breaking down model of a robot that it's on its last legs. It can barely do anything, but it's our hero's best friend. And actually, she sees him as sort of a brother. I mentioned she was orphaned earlier. This robot was programmed by her dad, so it's also sort of like a father figure, a brother figure, and a best friend. It's a wonderful character, and it gets kind of bullied right in the beginning. You just see how weak he is, and I don't know if it's supposed to be like synthetics are sort of like prejudiced against in this world, but we see right away that he doesn't really fit in with the world he's in. He is very much a sympathetic, tragic character, and then he gets an upgrade, and through that, almost sort of begins to transform into a villain. He becomes much stronger, much more intelligent. He's repaired, and then he begins he becomes quite menacing, in fact, and he sort of begins to operate with a cold, calculating logic in a way that, sort of seems like, if you think about it from a computer point of view, like this, he acts in a way that makes sense. He doesn't do something stupid just because, he's becoming evil. He's got to do evil things now for no reason, just because he's evil. They don't do that, and David Johnson portrays that transformation perfectly. It is such a wonderful character arc, and then of course, more things happen. I don't want to get into too much of a spoiler, but he's got a great arc as a character. It's funny that the synthetic robot feels like the most fully fleshed out character in this movie. And finally, just to touch on a few of the scenes specifically, I want to talk about the scene which was the least suspenseful for me, even though it was a very clearly intentional suspense scene, and that is the walk among the monsters quietly without being seen. And you've seen this in all of the recent zombie movies where somebody has to put blood and guts all over them and then tiptoe through the zombies so that the zombies don't smell them. Army of the Dead did this. Don't Speak is basically this premise where everyone's tiptoeing quietly, and if you make a noise, everything's gonna jump at you. We have a scene like that with the facehuggers. That didn't work for me. I didn't feel the tension. Part of it was just the fact that it felt like a really cliched sequence to have. I've seen this in I don't know how many other horror movies, so even all the way back to the original Silent Hill, where she is sneaking past all of the nurses as they jitter and dance and are sort of asleep. But also because of the mechanisms by which it's explained that this is why the facehuggers can't see you, sort of didn't make sense. I didn't agree with it. But, it's I don't want to I don't want to nitpick at it because it might not be scientifically accurate, because that's not what's important in a movie like this. We don't need complete scientific accuracy. We definitely didn't have scientific accuracy with the way the rings of the planet were portrayed. Anyone who's a sci-fi nerd will probably pick up on that pretty quickly, but it doesn't matter. I felt that scene felt flat. And then the last scene I want to talk about is the very first scare scene, I'll say. The very first horror element. And I don't want to spoil it too much, but I just want to congratulate it because it was crafted so expertly. And what I will say is an act of misdirection. It's like a magic trick. Everyone's looking at one part, and then the scare happens where you're not looking, and that's where the magic happens. And it got a jump out of me. I'm not a very jumpy person. Even like jump scares that, it's not even like necessarily scary. It's just that you're startled because people jump when there's a loud bang or a loud noise. The first scare in this movie is just set up so flawlessly that it really illustrates just how much this movie does right. And that quality that you get from that first sequence is throughout. And I don't want to spoil the final act. I think most fans of the franchise will sort of see it coming. They know that there's going to be one last big thing, and all I can say is it lives up to the fucking hype. You're getting hyped. This movie has possibly one of the best payoffs of any Alien film, and possibly the best. So, if I haven't convinced you, I don't know, man. If I haven't convinced you at this point, geez, I guess it's my fault. I'm the one who's failing, so unsubscribe if I haven't convinced you to go see this movie. If you are convinced, please go see it immediately. It's a great theatric experience. I saw it in XD. There's a big giant screen. Surround sound was fantastic. The aliens crawling, you could hear them behind you. God, such a fantastic film. 10 out of 10 WarBux. Make sure to like and subscribe, and as always, take care. comb your hair.